My name is Catherine. I'll be moderating today's debate. I thought briefly I'd share a little bit about myself and kind of what brought me here. So I have a YouTube channel focused on animal rights and I guess you could say like total liberation. And a few years ago, I posted a video about how 2020 made me embrace antinatalism. And I had encountered David Benatar's argument for antinatalism prior to the pandemic, but I didn't really have like a good argument against it. I just didn't consider myself an antinatalist until 2020. It was my personal experience with panic disorder that really solidified it for me. Although I had already made the decision not to have children, I kind of realized in the throes of a horrific panic attack that it was not just a personal choice, but a morally good decision. And because I live a very privileged life, I still suffer, and my hypothetical children would inevitably suffer as well. So, yeah, that's what brought me here. The motion of today's debate is: should extinction be the goal of the antinatalist movement? This is not a debate about whether extinction is a good thing or not. It's whether we as antinatalists should be promoting a message of extinction. It's more so a debate about strategy. We thought it'd be helpful to explore kind of the different views of what general direction we should be aiming our efforts to do good as antinatalists. So arguing for the motion, we have Les Knight, who is a finder, not founder, of the voluntary human extinction movement. And arguing against, we have John Williams, an animal advocate and co-founder of Antinatalist Advocacy. So as for the format of the debate, we'll start with opening statements and then move into an open discussion between the two debaters. Then we'll open up for questions from the audience, give closing statements, and then do a quick wrap up. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can find the link to the form pinned in the chat as well as in the description box. Our first guest, Les Knight, is a volunteer in the voluntary human extinction movement and has been suggesting that people stop procreating since the early 1970s. Les advocates for our voluntary extinction as an aspirational goal that is highly unlikely to be achieved. Our second guest, John Williams, is the co-founder of Antinatalist Advocacy and has a strong interest in suffering-focused ethics. He has been a card-carrying antinatalist for over 5 years and is a longtime animal advocate. Over 5 years, I'm wondering if that was kind of around the same time as me with the pandemic.
March
John
2020, so definitely during the pandemic. Lots of reflection going on.
Okay. And John is particularly focused on practical efforts to do good, and will be arguing that extinction should not be the goal of the antinatalist movement. You'll each have 10 minutes for your opening statements, followed by 20 minutes of open discussion, and then we'll have 30 minutes reserved for a Q&A and 5-minute closing statements to round things off. Again, the question form will be in the chat, and there's also a link to donate to MSI Reproductive Choices, which is our fundraiser. All right, so take it away, Les.
Thank you, Catherine.
No problem.
Yes, I consider myself the finder rather than the founder because I always knew someone had to have come up with this somewhere along the line, and it just got lost in all the native cultural conditioning. Earlier this year, I learned of a French activist who laid it all out about 100 years ago, Marie Huot, although I can't pronounce her name properly. But so I just found it again. It got lost. So I would like to start by addressing the futility of human extinction as a goal. It's theoretically possible, but the chances of success are slim and none. So why would we pursue an impossible goal that might make us look foolish? Well, I've never worried about that. It seems to me that the goals most worth striving for are highly unlikely to be achieved. World peace, for example. Humans have always been killing each other. Why even bother to try for peace? Stopping the sixth extinction. Ending exploitation of animals for food. Convincing everyone that it's immoral to bring a new person into existence. Now, these are all goals worth pursuing, and none are likely to succeed. So I see these as directions rather than goals that we actually might achieve. I know I'll never see the day there are no humans on the planet. Knowing I can't succeed in my life's work has helped keep me from getting burned out or disillusioned, as I've seen happen to so many activists over the years. Because of my promotion of voluntary human extinction over the past 50 years, I've included in a book that's coming out next January called Live to See the Day. And it's a collection of stories about people working on something they know they'll never see the day that it's accomplished. So, as a strategy for getting more people to understand the concept, should antinatalists hold back from advocating for our eventual extinction? Well, my aversion to pandering to existing misconceptions just to make an idea more acceptable started in 1970. At the time, human overpopulation was accepted as an obvious part of the environmental movement, which I was very interested in. Earth was fast approaching 4 billion humans, so I joined Zero Population Growth, ZPG. Their motto was Stop at 2, which most people were doing anyway, so it was very popular. It legitimized procreation because it supposedly just replaced a couple. Of course, it doesn't work that way, and actual zero population growth was so far off that it couldn't even be extrapolated at the time. I decided that rather than stop at 2, we needed to stop at once. That's when I arrived at the conclusion that Earth's biosphere would be far better off without us. I saw each new human as a destroyer of nature. Their suffering wasn't my concern because I was firmly in the deep ecology camp. Social ecologists were concerned about eco-preservation because our well-being depended on it. And the idea was also more popular among mainstream environmentalists as a result. Protecting nature for its own sake wasn't as appealing. We were considered anti-human. So ZPG changed their name to Population Connection, so they're now PC. They found that the stated goal of a human population that wasn't growing was holding them back, although they assured us longtime members that that's still a goal. So today, the message of population awareness organizations is to have smaller families. Consider having none or one, and be sure to stop at 2. So I can't blame them for not wanting to alienate their patrons. If any of them said that the intentional creation of one more of us by anyone anywhere can't be justified, they'd be done for. So each of these attempts to appeal to a wider audience blunts their message, and so there's a trade-off, a weaker message for a wider appeal. I was blocked by Michael Mann, a well-known American climate scientist, for commenting that a large part of our problems today are because scientists in the past downplayed the findings. So he's concerned that doomsayers will cause people to give up on the climate crisis. Well, I'm concerned that people will keep sentencing new humans to life if they aren't aware of our dire situation. So don't give up. There's still hope. We can turn it around. Oh, thank God. We wanted to have another child. There's not that much hope. If we don't advocate for our extinction, we place ourselves in an illogical position. It means that some human births could be justified someday. Well, they can't, ever. So when promoting antinatalism, extinction might not be the best way to start off. It could alienate people, but the possibility should still be acknowledged. When I'm promoting our voluntary extinction, I don't lead with antinatalism. If people have never considered that it's cruel and immoral to bring a new person into existence because of the suffering they'll experience, it comes across as too negative. I try to present the positive aspects of phasing ourselves out instead of running through the list of horrors we're causing each other in the biosphere. There will potentially be more of everything for everyone. We can take care of existing people. World peace might be possible if we aren't fighting over resources. Wildlife habitat could expand if we didn't need more human habitat. Now, none of these are antinatalist points, of course. So presenting antinatalism positively is more of a challenge. We're sort of handicapped from the beginning with a name that starts off with anti. Saying life is better without offspring is just the child-free philosophy. Maybe we could say how happy all the people who don't exist are, having a non-existent party for eternity. It's just unfettered, carefree, safe fun. Well, that is, until a couple of people jerk them into existence. At vehement information booths, more and more people are bringing up the concept of antinatalism. Sometimes they'll say, the world is getting worse, and until things turned around, I'll never have a kid. And that's my opening to introduce them to antinatalism. All human cultures evolved to be natalist by selective pressures. Any culture that wasn't natalist would be outbred and overtaken by those that were. It was never a good idea to bring someone into existence. And from ancient texts, we know that proto-antinatalists tried to tell people, but it never caught on. When births are an unquestioned good, a counter ideology is needed, or it was needed before we reached 8 billion. The time for antinatalism has come, though it's probably too late. So my strategic approach is from an anarchist perspective. Instead of trying to convince people to take on a specific philosophy, I think people should be encouraged to think about what actions they might want to take and why. We'll change no mind before it's time, but we can give it a good nudge. Extinction, like any new aspect added to the philosophy of antinatalism, is a distraction from the basic foundation. However, these concepts should be seen as a smorgasbord of appeals. Bring in more adherents. As they nibble on this and that idea, you might find what satisfies them for the time being. Making it socially acceptable to not co-create more than we already have is more important, but that's already happening for a variety of reasons. Young people often don't feel they need to come up with a reason beyond just not wanting to. In the past, people who deviated from the default life had to justify that choice. Now it's just, I don't want to, and you can't make me. What's really needed is making it possible. Full reproductive freedom doesn't exist anywhere. Restrictions on the right to not procreate range from inconvenient to violent and even fatal. Hundreds of millions of women, girls and women are denied their right to choose if, when, how often, and with whom they procreate. If we want an achievable goal that we can all agree and work towards, I think sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR, fills the bill. At the same time, we can encourage others to become more aware of their procreative options, especially antinatalism. Our eventual extinction because of not procreating doesn't have to be a prominent goal, but it can't be separated from the antinatalist philosophy. May we live long and die out, for whatever reasons we like.
All right. And John, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Can you both hear me? Just checking.
Yes.
Apologies for not being on camera, and I realise now that I'm just a voice coming out like Big Brother on the screen. But yes, just recovering from this back injury. But yes, thank you both. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Les, in particular, for that opening statement. Really grateful to both of you for this debate and everyone watching for tuning in. I'm going to begin my opening statement with a few definitions. So first, I define antinatalism as the conclusion that it is wrong to bring sentient beings into existence. I define antinatalists as the people who agree with this conclusion. And I'm going to define the antinatalist movement as antinatalists who want to do good in the world in ways that align with the antinatalist conclusion. I know there is some debate on whether there is such a thing as the antinatalist community, let alone the antinatalist movement. But if you're tuning into this, there's a decent chance that you subscribe to the antinatalist label and want to do good in ways that align with the antinatalist conclusion. I'm going to be arguing against the motion that extinction should be the goal of the antinatalist movement for three practical reasons. One, it seems like an unrealistic end goal, specifically voluntary human extinction. Two, a focus on human extinction could turn potential allies into enemies. And three, a focus on human extinction distracts us from tangible good that we could otherwise be focusing on. I'm now going to address each of these three arguments in turn. One, extinction seems like an unrealistic end goal. According to UK government data, approximately 80% of women who have reached the age of 45, roughly the end of childbearing years, are mothers. Now, this number is falling, and it doesn't speak to parental regret or people who regret having children. But this also doesn't speak to involuntary childlessness or people in the 20% who did not have children who wanted to be parents. But either way, it still seems that in a country like the UK that has a low birth rate, a below replacement birth rate, the majority of people still want to be parents. Why is this relevant to the debate? Because to achieve the goal of voluntary human extinction, we would need to convince everyone to voluntarily forego their biological and social drives to become parents. I don't think this is a case of me taking an ambitious end goal too literally. The goal is embedded within the phrase voluntary human extinction movement, not the voluntary childlessness movement or the voluntary low birth rate movement, a bit like the stop at 2 that Les mentioned before. The phrase voluntary human extinction has extinction as its aim. All you need to do to defeat this goal is to have just one couple or one woman with access to a sperm donor decide to have children, and then you have thwarted the goal of voluntary human extinction. Now, you could prevent this person from procreating, but then you failed on the voluntary part of the goal. So in other words, voluntary human extinction seems like an extremely unlikely goal for us to achieve. Now, I will quickly address involuntary human extinction, which, to be clear, Les does not promote, just because it is brought up often in antinatalist spaces with the big red button, etc. I think that with AI, nuclear weapons, and man-made pandemics, involuntary human extinction actually seems quite likely, but I don't think this should be the goal of the antinatalist movement. I think it would be extremely immoral and lack humility to be so confident in our antinatalist beliefs that we grant ourselves permission to violate the autonomy of billions of fellow moral agents to either sterilize them or wipe them out entirely. As well as being horrifically immoral, I think strategically a focus on involuntary human extinction would be suicidal for the antinatalist movement by making ourselves the enemies of natalists who would understandably see us as a threat to them and their children. And this leads to my second argument against extinction being our end goal. 2, a focus on human extinction could turn potential allies into enemies. I want you to imagine, just for the sake of argument, a potential ally to the antinatalist movement that we'll call Peter the parent. In this hypothetical, Peter supports many efforts to do good that seem to align with the antinatalist conclusion that it is wrong to bring sentient beings into existence. He supports full access to contraception and abortion so that nobody goes through an unwanted pregnancy. He opposes breeding billions of sentient beings in animal agriculture and wants to see a transition to a vegan food system. And he also opposes creating digital sentience or AI systems that experience suffering by bringing them into existence. Now, in my opinion, I think Peter would be someone to collaborate with in these efforts to do good. But Peter the parent might be put off by the discourse he sees in the antinatalist community about wiping out humanity, or at least sterilizing him and his children. Even a focus on strictly voluntary human extinction would likely be off-putting for Peter, who enjoys being a parent and disagrees that he has done something wrong for giving his kids what appears to be a good life. And so, in this hypothetical scenario, our focus on extinction drives away Peter the parent and many other potential allies like him that we could have collaborated with if we'd had a different focus. And that leads to my final argument against extinction being our end goal. 3, a focus on extinction distracts us from tangible good. There are plenty of things for us to focus on that align with the antinatalist conclusion that appear to be far more realistic than voluntary human extinction. For example, improving access to contraception, moving away from animal agriculture, and opposing the creation of digital sentience would likely lead to fewer sentient beings exposed to the harms of coming into existence. There are already movements that focus on these and other cause areas that align with the antinatalist conclusion, and this presents the opportunity for us to collaborate with others, even if, like Peter the parent, they don't subscribe to the antinatalist label. Now, we don't have to be sneaky or hide our actual views when collaborating with others. We can be crystal clear that we are antinatalists that believe it is wrong to bring sentient beings into existence, And if everyone agreed with us, humanity would go extinct. But we can also be clear that this seems unlikely, and we therefore focus on more realistic means of doing good. That's why I think a focus on extinction is an unhelpful distraction. In conclusion, to recap, I've argued against the motion that extinction should be the goal of the antinatalist movement for 3 practical reasons. Voluntary human extinction seems like an unrealistic end goal. A focus on human extinction could turn potential allies into enemies, and a focus on human extinction distracts us from tangible good. I'd like to end my opening statement by acknowledging the appeal of extinction as an end goal. Maybe different to you, Les, and potentially you as well, Catherine. I actually view nature, with all of the animals suffering from being eaten alive, as well as suffering disease and starvation. I view nature as a total horror show, and therefore a larger human population with fewer wild animals could in theory lead to less suffering. However, I'm also fearful of the huge amount of suffering that humans could cause in the future, such as by creating digital sentience or spreading suffering throughout the universe by colonizing other planets. Therefore, I'm sympathetic to the idea that human extinction would actually be better than the current trajectory of our species. That said, I think we need to be more practical in our efforts to do good and not focus on comforting but unrealistic scenarios like convincing everyone to not become parents. There are tangible areas of good that we antinatalists can focus on that do align with the antinatalist conclusion that we can collaborate with others with that seem way more realistic and achievable. Therefore, I believe extinction should not be the goal of the antinatalist movement. And with that, I yield my time.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move into open discussion. Do you have a comment on that, Les?
Well, yeah. I wish we disagreed more. It'd be more interesting for our viewers, I think. But, yes, I pretty much agree with all of that, except, of course, since I am a volunteer with the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement, I really think that's what needs to be put forward, even though it is completely impossible. And the reason is that it helps people realize our place in the biosphere, which is out. But John has a good point about, I will never be on any of these podcasts of population balance, population matters. None of these mainstream environmental population awareness organizations will even touch voluntary human extinction movement because they've got to uphold their position. That's why CPG changed their name to PC, so they would not be laughed out of Congress, and they wanted to have an impact. So yes, they now are still part of the establishment and can help influence and get materials into school and so on. And if they said there should be no births, well, that'd be the end of them, wouldn't it?
No, and just on that, actually, Les, there was something you said at the beginning about not worrying about looking foolish. And I do think that, like, whenever you're advocating for good, you're going to have people who oppose you and they might call you names. And you do need a bit of a thick skin whenever you're kind of putting yourself out there. But I do worry with looking foolish specifically that a bit like with the examples you brought up, it might actually really harm our potential to collaborate with others, particularly on like the areas of doing good, like you said about SRHR, sexual, reproductive, and health, right? Is the H for health, sorry? But reproductive freedom, essentially. If we do look foolish to people who are campaigning for reproductive freedom, I do worry that will make us less impactful. So I'm interested in what you think about like looking foolish with respect to collaboration.
Yes, I can see that position for sure. People who are advocating for SRHR would probably say, thanks for the help, but no thanks. We don't need your help. You're making us look bad. We are not for extinction. We're for people to go forward and so on. But we don't have to officially have their approval to approve of them. That's been the case all along. Yes, go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, I was going to say, if you can clarify when you use like acronyms, because at the SRHR, can you clarify what that is again?
Yes, sexual and reproductive health and rights.
Okay.
So shorten it to SRH, but you got to have the rights. That's all part of it too. It hasn't become as popular as it should, because it sure is a convenient acronym, SRHR. That's what we want.
I did have another question, if that's all right, Les. There was something that you mentioned about spreading habitats. And I do think that there is a difference between you and I in terms of how we view nature. And as I said, I do take a suffering-focused approach to ethics, and I am very worried about the amount of suffering I see in nature that's not caused by humans, animals eating each other alive and this sort of thing. And I also do have a sentiocentric understanding of antinatalism. Like I said at the beginning, I view antinatalism as the conclusion it's wrong to bring any sentient being into existence. So a moral agent like a human bringing another moral agent into existence. Bring another being into existence. Sorry, a moral agent like a human bring another being into existence. So I don't think like the lions are doing anything wrong by having children, because they're not moral agents. But just on the spreading habitats point, because I know that there is a lot of advocating for rewilding and humans intentionally spreading ecosystems to areas that there currently are none. Would you see this as conflicting with antinatalism as you understand it? Because I do think personally that would be a case of us, through our actions, bringing more beings into existence.
Yes, I always associate antinatalism with humans, bringing humans into existence. And we shouldn't, because of the harm that will come to them and the harm they will do to other species and the world as a whole. So if we take care of all of the suffering that we are responsible for, which is ourselves, each other, through wars and conflicts, but also through animal agriculture, I don't need to give you the numbers. I think those are all very clear how much suffering goes on in our breeding and killing and eating of livestock. 70% of the birds on the planet are poultry. So if we take care of all of that, the part we're responsible for, the part that we're not responsible for, which is really not our business, I would say. We have never really benefited the natural world. We might bring condors back from extinction or a few things like that, but really that's just undoing what we've done. And yes, there's a lot of suffering in the natural world. That's what drives evolution. If they didn't feel pain, they wouldn't survive. There's a condition that humans sometimes have where they don't feel any pain. They don't live long. Oldest was about 25 years old. So I think we should back off on nature, except for rewilding as much as possible, and preservation of their habitat and their lives with overpasses, underpasses on highways, and that is what we are responsible for in the suffering of wildlife. And hunting, of course, usually is not a good idea for them. There might be argued that since we've eliminated predators, they'll suffer less if we kill some off, but pretty weak. So that is my position on wildlife suffering.
And I could definitely see with some of those things I would advocate for, like you said, the passes, so that I think they're quite common in the States. I think you have a lot more wild animals than we have here in the UK, but so that animals don't get hit by cars when they're crossing a highway or something like that. I guess where I see a bit of an inconsistency is I worry that with people, you're thinking about them from the individual perspective, in the sense of like the suffering is experienced by people when it comes to advocating for things like reproductive freedom. And I do worry that when it comes to environmentalism and we're talking about the biosphere, we're then talking about the ecosystem in a way that ignores the experience of individual animals. So, for example, if we reintroduce predators or we rewild an area, we would be bringing beings into existence, which would conflict with my sentiocentric antinatalism. But I could still imagine that that might be good for the ecosystem, in quotes. But those animals that would otherwise come into existence, they're going to be eaten alive or die of disease, etc. And I just do wonder, Les, if there's maybe, by antinatalists having this focus on the ecosystem in this broad sense, or nature in this broad sense, we kind of miss the perspective of the harms that individuals face from coming into existence, which for me is at the core of antinatalism. I'm interested to get your thoughts on that.
Yes, you're right. It is more concerned with the entire biosphere and with ecosystems' integrity themselves, rather than individuals. It is unfortunate that the gazelle is taken down by a lion, but it also keeps the gazelle population healthy, and that's just the way nature works. It's just yesterday I read of a chimpanzee troop that made war on a neighboring chimpanzee troop, killed 21 of them, and in the aftermath, their infants survived better, and they had more of them. So I'm, as brutal as it is, I'm thinking, geez, our closest relative is a murderous ape, and then I'm thinking, well, maybe that's kind of how humanity has been. We've been killing each other ever since before we were Homo sapiens. And it's really awful. Of course, the way to stop all that is to stop procreating. There won't be anybody killing each other if there isn't anybody here. But speaking of, I should give you a chance before I go on to address that, John, if you had a point.
Sure, and definitely I think that, I think with the overall point, at least it's intuitive to me, and I used to work for, I won't name them, I used to work for a very large environmental organisation, very prominent one, that humans have not benefited the ecosphere, benefited nature. And again, even the perspective of wild animals, like changing migratory patterns and this sort of thing, there's a lot of suffering there. I'm thinking about it from the perspective of the individual wild animal. And, as mentioned, I'm an antinatalist because I'm concerned about the harm of coming into existence. And whatever causes me that harm, especially if I'm a wild animal that can't contextualize things, I don't think it necessarily makes a difference to them whether it's a human that's causing that harm or another animal that's causing that harm. And I think this is especially relevant for something like rewilding, where I do view it as humans bringing in beings into existence. I don't know if it's, I don't think it's necessarily inconsistency, but I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of, like, if we bring the animals into existence, they then get eaten alive by another animal, but because we didn't cause the animal to be, we didn't eat them personally. Like, the lion hunted the gazelle that we bred through rewilding, or caused it to come into existence through rewilding, but because it benefited the system overall, the ecosystem overall, that there's nothing problematic with that. I would find the harm that we would cause by spreading nature, even if we don't cause it at the moment that it's experienced. We don't infect the animals with diseases. We don't hunt the animals. Like, it doesn't appear morally to be. It doesn't appear to be better from the animal's perspective, if that makes sense. And I just view that we would be responsible because we are the ones that brought those animals into existence. And it doesn't really matter to them that they were hunted by lions rather than hunted by humans with guns.
Yes, the suffering.
We can definitely move on. Sorry, this is I've talked a lot about wild animal suffering. So. Yes.
Yes. I think that is the division that we have. I make the dividing line between non-human animals that are domesticated and non-human animals that are not domesticated. In one case, we're totally responsible. We brought them into existence, shouldn't have, but got to eat. So we overpopulated and couldn't survive on what was there. And so now we raise animals as well as plants. Mm-hmm. So I think getting on to how we are perceived by those we want to seem rational to, I think if we say we want to wipe out all of the animals on the planet because they suffer, that is probably just as ridiculous sounding to most people as wanting us to go extinct. People are rather enamored of wildlife, even if all they've seen is David Attenborough episodes, which show them rather idyllic, although a lot of times they do show just how much suffering there is from predation. But that's how it works. It's another example of human supremacy, which is what's gotten us into such a dire straits as it is. It's human supremacy, thinking that we know what's best for the entire biosphere, has been around for billions of years. Some furless ape comes along and goes, "Oh, we don't like that. We think we should change that. Too much suffering."
I do agree and I don't think like active intervention into the wild is directly related to antinatalism. Like I said, I think it's like if we were doing rewilding, we were bringing those animals into existence. I think that would be related to antinatalism. But I do agree, someone who's also concerned about the suffering of wild animals, advocating to turn the Amazon into a huge car park and just concrete everywhere practically doesn't seem like the best way to go. And certainly in the last talk, I brought up Wild Animal Initiative, and they don't take that kind of approach as well, because they know that it's not going to be particularly a winner for collaborating with others who do like nature. I did have a question for you, Les, in terms of like how you think about how I think my comments on the goal, the unrealistic end goal, because we both agree it's an unrealistic end goal, like an aspirational end goal of voluntary human extinction, and whether or not you think that it's as big of a problem as I think it is. Like, I think that the fact it is so unrealistic is a big problem for pushing it, both directionally and also reputationally as well. We might look a bit overconfident in our persuasive abilities. But you acknowledge right at the beginning of the talk that you do also view this as an unrealistic end goal, and you're not kidding yourself in that you will see a day when there are no more humans. So I'm interested in you think that it's as much of a problem as I think it is, or like what I'm missing in terms of me viewing it as a big problem.
Why I think that we shouldn't try to wipe out all of the rest of the life on Earth.
No, sorry. That you're so my comments on voluntary human extinction, the fact that we both agree that it's a very unrealistic end goal.
Mm-hmm.
I view it as a big problem, both just directionally having something that we can't achieve, but also just in terms of our reputation, that we might look like we are massively overconfident. And I'm interested in seeing as we both agree that it's unrealistic.
Uh-huh.
Your thoughts on my comments on its unrealisticness, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So like that story of the child throwing starfish back into the ocean after a storm has thrown them clear up onto the banks, and somebody say, "You're never going to get all those starfish back in the ocean. It doesn't matter." Say, "Well, it matters to this one," and they throw it back in the ocean. So each time that we help someone realize that it would be not a good idea to bring somebody into existence, that's one more that it matters to. So I don't care that it's impossible. Of course it's impossible, but we can do the best we can, try for it, and incrementally along the way, unlike the goal of extinction, we can help people improve their lives by not procreating and improve very much the hapless victim of their prurient interests.
Now that definitely makes sense, and I do like the parable of the. Is it a parable? Is that the right word? The story of the starfish, where she's throwing them back. I guess just a point of disagreement there. There was something you said, and apologies if I'm. Please do correct me on this. You said something about that if we don't focus on extinction as an end goal, then we might be implicitly saying that human births are okay, or like at least some human births are permissible.
Right.
And I view it differently. I think that, like I was saying towards the end of my statement, I think that we can be very clear that we are antinatalists. You know, I helped co-found Antinatalist Advocacy, and it's got antinatalist in the title. But at the same time, especially when we're speaking with people outside of the community and trying to collaborate, just say, because we view convincing people to go extinct as an unrealistic end goal, we're going to focus on these other things like reproductive freedom. I don't think it's implicit by not having this focus that we are saying that that some human births are okay. I think it'll be fine to say we just recognize that we're not going to convince everyone, so we're going to focus on other things. In much the same way as like there are animal advocacy organizations that focus on like institutional changes and systemic changes to transitioning over to a plant-based food system rather than advocating for convincing everyone to go vegan. And it's not because they think it's okay for some people not to be vegan. It's more that they recognize that it's maybe not the most impactful approach to take. They want everyone to be vegan. They recognize that it's unlikely everyone will be, so they focus on other things. And I guess that I'm saying that we could do the same as antinatalists, where, you know, we want everyone to stop procreating. We recognize it's unrealistic, so we're going to focus on other things. Do you think there's like a contradiction or something wrong with this approach?
No, it's very practical. If we are for reproductive freedom, that also includes procreation. If a couple wants to do that, the freedom part is making the choice and making sure that people have the choice and a fully informed choice, not overly influenced by natalist cultural conditioning, which is a big order in itself. But yes, you're right. If we say, how about having meatless Tuesdays? You know, oh, come on, just stop eating meat. Well, it's a start. And, you know, we're getting there.
Yes, definitely. And I think that reflects my own approach. Something I brought up in the last talk was that if I'm focusing on the impact rather than the personal purity, that yes, things like meat-free Mondays, they do bother me in the sense of like, if you recognize that it's wrong to eat meat, why not do it 7 days a week? Like, why not refrain from it 7 days a week rather than 1 day a week? But then at the same time, I've seen, and I'm not so sure about meatless Mondays in particular, but something like Veganuary, where they encourage people to go vegan for a month, or at least eat a plant-based diet for a month. There's been some positive like evaluations of that and the impact of that. So I think when I was first vegan, I would have said, no, Veganuary is not a good thing to support because it's not all the way, and 100% vegan is the moral baseline, all this sort of stuff. And now I'm a lot more kind of impact focused and think about like it's in, you know, Veganuary aren't saying it's okay to only be vegan 1 month a year. They want everyone to be vegan all the time, but it's a start, you know, and maybe the same with like that they're not called the low birth rate movement, but the different movements you talked about before, like Stop at 2 and this sort of thing.
I think we agree on this. I'm not going to shame people when I see them, they're pregnant. So how could you do that? Shame on you. It's like, no, of course not. They made the choice. Maybe it wasn't the best choice. We don't think it was, but, you know, don't want to be dictators about this whole thing. Voluntary reproductive freedom and so on. Are we ready for questions from?
Yeah, why don't Catherine, if you had any thoughts or reflections?
Yeah, I'm curious. There does seem to be a few questions from the audience, but I was wondering, like, with veganism, for example, there seemingly are only positive impacts. Like, if everyone went vegan, it would be just like nothing bad would come out of that, I don't think. Whereas with voluntary human extinction, like, there are a lot of problems that would come from like the dwindling population, like there would be a huge population of elderly people, and then there would be nobody to take care of them. Like the healthcare system would collapse. Like, I don't know if you have any comments on that, Les.
Oh, sure. Well, obviously that is a concern, and it's happening already. The number of old people like me who are not taking care of themselves or can't take care of themselves and need help is increasing. The boomer boom in Western countries will be over not too long. Of course, it's going to continue on in other places. I think if we ever did phase out and the population is expected to is projected to peak in about 2070 at about 10 billion, which would be horrific in itself. But there will be fewer people in old age suffering, not being cared for, if we have fewer of us born. Of course, if you're not born, you don't die, and you don't get old. But I think you plan ahead, and that's what, if you can. A lot of people can't plan ahead. Food insecurity is so rampant. A billion people don't know where the next meal is coming from. So telling them to plan ahead is a cruel joke for them. But it can be arranged to take care of people, even down to the last few people, because they would plan ahead.
And just to come into that as well, I definitely agree. And as you point out, Les, it is already causing a problem, the aging population in parts of the world, with things like healthcare and providing for people and this sort of thing. And I agree that planning ahead is the way to go. I think that sometimes I've seen antinatalists kind of downplay the problem of the dwindling population, of falling birth rates, especially like what it means for society. I'm always just brought back to David Benatar's comments about it being the procreational Ponzi scheme. Like, I was brought into existence, and to make my life go well, I then need to bring in the next generation to look after me, make my life go well. And the next generation has to bring in the next generation to make their own lives go well, etc. And it does feel a bit like a Ponzi scheme. And yes, I think it'll be tough. I'm optimistic with things like AI and automation that, well, again, it's just so uncertain, but at least in theory that could help with this transition to a lower human population, or at least a smaller human workforce. But it will be difficult. I guess I just come back to thinking that this is a problem for us who are in existence to solve. And it's not fair to bring in the next generation to kind of solve that problem for us, because then we go down the route of the procreational Ponzi scheme that Benatar talked about.
Right. Yeah, fully agree. And when people say, well, we don't have enough workers to take care of the old people, have to pay into taxes into the pension system. Well, the U.S. spends almost $1 trillion on war. And now other nations in Europe and so on are talking about boosting their war expenditures. It's 2% of the GDP, and it's supposed to go up to maybe as much as 5. Who knows how much? So all of that money wasted on killing people, if it were converted into taking care of people, problem solved. Don't need to breed more workers. Pretty unrealistic, isn't it?
No, I definitely agree with that.
I do want to know what your thoughts are on the difference between other goals being unrealistic versus voluntary human extinction, because I kind of see a difference, because I think that convincing the world or getting people to like shift to a plant-based food system, that's like way more attainable in my mind. Like,
Might be, yeah.
And same with like world peace. Like, that's obviously we're never going to have total world peace, but that's even more like attainable seeming to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have thoughts on that too, John, but
well, if we could have a moratorium on nuclear weapons and phase them all out and eliminate them, that is practical, possible, could happen. I mean, right now we've got 1,000 guns pointed at each other's heads. ready to go off. That the trigger is set. So yes, that is an attainable goal, but we don't seem to be getting close to it. Did I answer your question, or did I get sidetracked?
It's kind of a hard question to answer, honestly. I don't know like what I don't know if I can even articulate why. That's just my intuition. Is just like it seems like so far-fetched that we could just voluntarily go extinct.
Mm-hmm.
These other goals seem
that's
not
it's part
totally
of the reason.
More attainable.
Yeah, it's part of the reason I promote it, is that it helps people realize, okay, why do we not want humans to go extinct? So let's get some thought about that, and some of the answers are just amazing. None of them make any sense, of course, to me, but it's interesting to hear people explain why humans, without us, the universe doesn't have a consciousness, and reasons like that. So it's really pretty interesting. That's why I never get tired of hosting information tables and booths. People will come up and go, "What is this? I'd never heard of this. What is it?" And I explain, and they go, "Oh." Then they have their ideas. And that's the fun part, is listening to people give reasons for wanting to procreate, reasons for perpetuating our species in spite of the evidence. And a lot of people just go, yeah, I agreed. I'd never heard of it before, but include me in.
I guess from my perspective, there's something about the goal of voluntary human extinction that I don't feel with respect to like world peace. Because I view that, imagine that we managed to get the amount of war deaths down by a significant proportion. And especially with a lot of the initiatives like the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and a lot of the conventions came out of World War II, which is just an unbelievably bloody war, 60 or 80 million dead. It's just absolutely horrendous. And, you know, the following years weren't great, the Cold War, etc., which was hot in a lot of periods. But it wasn't as bloody as the first half of the 20th century. And it didn't mean that world peace was achieved, but I would still view it as a win, you know? I like, not even as a win, like there's something about like you have an end goal, and if you get 80% of the way there, that's really good. I don't know if extinction, that doesn't feel the same to me. It feels so final. There's something about the extinction point being so final that I don't know, even as like a North Star, necessarily how helpful it is. Like if we have a population of 7 billion humans or a population of 3 billion humans, even though I don't know if we're necessarily closer to extinction because it's still so far away. Like 3 billion is a lot of people. Like maybe I'd be, if there were like 100 humans, I'd maybe be a bit more comfortable with it as a goal. I don't know. There's something about it too. There's also part, as I said, about the voluntary part. It does restrict our options. So sometimes when I speak to animal activists, they say something like, we need to convince everyone to go vegan. And I disagree. I say, we need to get people stop eating animals. And whether that's convincing everyone to go vegan, whether that's making lab-grown meat, whether that's switching over to a plant-based food system, I don't really mind. I'm actually quite agnostic in terms of how we get there. But we've got this end goal. We want to stop breeding animals in animal agriculture, just end animal agriculture. And there are lots of different ways that people are kind of working towards that in different ways. And that makes it more realistic to me. And again, if we end up with an 80% vegan world, that's a lot better than where we are now. You know, if we massively reduce the number. Whereas with voluntary human extinction, it does restrict us in our ways of doing it. And as I said in the opening statement, you would only need one person to choose to procreate to thwart the goal, let alone billions. I don't know. It just, there's something about it which just doesn't really work as an ambitious North Star for me, that a goal like world peace or ending animal agriculture, I don't feel that same kind of resistance to it, if that makes sense.
Right. I think you're right.
Okay, well, we have quite a few questions from the audience. So this was for Les. If extinction is the public goal of antinatalists, how can we communicate in a way to minimize shutting down any mainstream engagement?
Shutting down mainstream
Engagement.
interest. Sorry, my speech to text somehow quit working.
Oh, engagement, mainstream engagement.
Mainstream engagement. Oh, yeah. Well, in some ways, my promoting our extinction has got me on right-wing programs all over the place, and wouldn't have been on there if I was just promoting fewer people. So in some ways, I get more exposure because of it. I'm not sure of the question. I've got
I
a
think they're asking if it is the goal, can we communicate it in a way to minimize people shutting down?
oh sure, yeah, and that's through the route of reproductive freedom. You say, do you think that everyone on the planet should have the wherewithal to not procreate if they don't want to? Very few people would disagree with that, and so we've got uh, the common ground, and of course, well, even if everybody agreed not to procreate, it'd be 120 years or so before we actually went extinct there. So yes, I think reproductive freedom, SRHR, is the way. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay. So I guess that kind of ties into this other question to both of you. They were asking, like, how much in practice do you overlap? Because you both seem to support practical things like access to contraception. Is this debate mostly academic?
Sure. Yeah, it is.
I guess from my perspective, as I said before, I do agree that we shouldn't worry about looking foolish in the sense of people saying mean things that hurt our feelings. But I do think we need to worry about looking foolish with respect to collaboration. And both in the sense of, I think we might look quite arrogant. Oh, sorry, dropped my laptop. Currently lying down this debate. Both in the sense of, like, we might look that we are quite arrogant or overconfident in our persuasive abilities if we make voluntary human extinction our end goal. But also the way that people might take this very personally. I invented this potential ally called Peter the parent, who intuitively doesn't think he's done anything wrong with having children, as a lot of people don't. But he does see a lot of more tangible suffering, like animal agriculture or something, and unplanned pregnancies and this sort of thing. So I do think that there is a lot by what we say our stated goal is in terms of putting people off and being frozen out of conversations. I think there really is something there that we need to be very mindful of. And I do think that being overconfident in our ability to change the world is a really common trait that I've noticed in social movements. I gave the example of vegans being overconfident that they're going to convince everyone to go vegan. But I've seen this, and apologies, Catherine, if I'm not speaking out of turn. I'm not sure. I've watched your videos. If you are like a socialist or a Marxist, I don't mean those as just don't mean those as a slur or anything like that. I know that you've been a lot on right-wing TV, Les, where they would view both socialists and Marxists as a slur. But I have been in like some Marxist spaces, and they just talk about it so confidently in the space I've been in. Like, oh yes, once we are, once we rule the country and this sort of thing, like it's a done deal. And at some antinatalist spaces, I see people talk in these ways. They're like, so yes, we do need to plan for the final generation. And I was like, whoa, what? Once you've convinced everyone to be an antinatalist, what's your evidence that this is going to be the case? So I do think that we need to be careful of our own hubris. And while Les, you do agree that this is, Les and I are not in disagreement that this is not an unrealistic end goal. I do think there are some norms, both internally in terms of our own thinking, and then externally how we're perceived about putting this front and center.
Yes, I think so. So in the regards of preparing for the day that there are fewer people, that is academic because it's not going to happen. And I do see, as you say, many movements think if we can just get 5.5% of the population, then everybody else will be on board. That's sort of been the attitude of population awareness for over 50 years, and Extinction Rebellion. If we just get people aware that we've got to stop using fossil fuels, I'll glue my hands to the road and throw soup on a painting, and then enough people, and then there will be a shift, a paradigm shift. So that is, it is an arrogance that people need to carry them forward in these social movements. But of course, they burn out because it doesn't ever happen.
And just to add as well, Les, I like the way that you said in your opening statement that by you not thinking that it is going to happen, that guards your own mental health and guards against disappointment, you know,
Right.
by not convincing yourself, like not kidding yourself that you are going to be able to convince everyone. I think that's a positive way to view things. Sorry, Catherine.
Mhm.
Oh, there's a few questions for you, John, that are kind of similar.
Sure.
So one person said, if we don't have extinction as a public goal of antinatalism, wouldn't people call us out for being deceptive? Because it's obvious that accepting this position results in accepting extinction. And then alongside that, someone asked, if we don't have extinction for our goal, do we have an antinatalist movement at all? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I massively disagree. I think that you can be an ethical vegan and still not think that our strategic goal should be convincing everyone else to be an ethical vegan. You can think, okay, we see a huge problem with animal agriculture. So rather than applying this one means, you know, this one form of activism, this end goal, we're going to convince everyone to be vegan because we are ourselves convinced of being vegan. I don't think that follows.
The goal would still be a vegan world eventually. Like that's the end goal, but it's like, oh, what's the best means to get there? Some would argue not necessarily trying to individually convince people to go vegan, but like your end goal is still veganism. So
I guess in that sense, it's like a vegan world, but not everyone is convinced in their mind that animals matter. If that makes sense. Like you can have a world that just doesn't eat animals because it's not available. Like in the UK, you can't buy dog meat. And there might be plenty of people in the UK who just don't eat dogs, not because they're objective, because it's just not available to them. And I think you can have a vegan world where people are, I don't see anything wrong with eating animals, but I can't get it. I can't eat animals because all the meat in the store is grown in the vat, or it's all plant-based or something like that. I just don't see the connection, but there is like an intuitive connection in the sense of like, if everyone was convinced by our position, then humanity would go extinct. But I don't think that means that we have to try and convince everyone to come over to our position. I don't see how the two are there. Like, I would definitely, I've heard some people say that what we need is an antinatalism by stealth strategy. So we don't tell people we're antinatalists, but we get inside movements and then we kind of steer them carefully. And I've heard similar stuff said in like Marxist spaces as well. Like, you know, we need to get inside movements and steer them to align with Marxism, but we don't tell them that we're communists or Marxists because then they'll be onto us. And I just think that's the wrong approach. I think it just encourages norms of being deceptive and sneaky. And I would definitely be against that. Like, I wouldn't set up an organization called Antinatalist Advocacy if I thought that we should keep antinatalism like under wraps, you know. I just think there's a big difference, though. We can say, look, we are antinatalists. We think it's wrong to bring sentient beings into existence, and we want everyone to agree with us. We don't think everyone will agree with us, so we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on more realistic goals. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing sneaky, and I don't think that the antinatalist conclusion therefore ties you to one form of activism, which is convincing people to be antinatalists or convincing humans to voluntarily go extinct.
Okay. And another one directed for you, John. If we water down our message, wouldn't we also have a recruitment issue? Because antinatalists won't connect with the message to then be motivated to do good.
Again, I don't. If the thing that they're motivated to do isn't that promising. It doesn't appear to be that, it doesn't seem to be particularly realistic. If someone's like, I'll only get involved in antinatalism if we advocate for human extinction, that doesn't feel like we should necessarily cater to that. Like, that feels like a bit of an odd one to me. It's like we should adopt it because that feels, if anything, a bit sneaky, actually. If we're like, we don't actually think this is an impactful message, but we're going to promote it here so that people get involved. And when they're involved, we're going to steer them towards something more helpful. That feels a little bit sneaky to me. I think we should just promote what we think will be helpful and impactful. And if we don't think that advocating for extinction, voluntary human extinction, is impactful or helpful, then we shouldn't do it. I think that we should just have like very clear and upfront with people, just for positive norms in the community, and also just to respect people as well. Imagine that people come along to the antinatalist community, the antinatalist online activism meetup or something like that, because they think we're going to go out and convince humanity to go extinct. And then they get there and they're like, what's all this talk about plan your career and donate to this factory farming charity? This isn't what I'm here for. So I think that, just being honest, like honesty is the only policy. Well, it's not the only policy. I think honesty is the best policy, both from an impact perspective and also just from like our own norms. It's just good to be honest.
Okay. Les, what has your experience been promoting the extinction message, if people receive it well or not?
Oh, over the years, it has become more and more positive. People, when I was early on, they would go, yeah, we probably shouldn't have more than one or two. Maybe we shouldn't have any, but going extinct, count me out. But lately, more and more people are going, yeah, I was thinking about having kids, but we've been talking about it and decided it's just not a good idea, and we're not going to do it because the future just doesn't look good enough. And yeah, the planet would be better off without humans on it. But of course, it's just, as someone mentioned, academic. It doesn't mean that somebody who comes to the information booth and I convince them, yeah, we should go extinct, it's like it's going to have any effect on our future extinction. It's just it's an idea to hold in mind to help us overcome the hubris of human supremacy and human exceptionalism, human-centeredness.
So what are your thoughts on Extinction Rebellion as a movement?
Their first goal, they say, is tell the truth. But they aren't telling the truth, and that is that there are too many of us on the planet, and we've got to address overpopulation, overshoot. They avoid that like the plague. So that's my feeling about Extinction Rebellion. And I'd like to see that energy utilized in more directly practical terms, trying to get solar panels, electric vehicles, and windmills everywhere as a solution. Even if it were a solution, it would be a temporary one, as long as we're continue to increase our population by 70, 80 million a year. So any cause is a lost cause without what we used to say, population control, but now that term has fallen out of control. Without reproductive freedom, I guess we could say. Without that, and very few will want to touch it, thanks to the work of George Monbiot, saying anybody who thinks we're overpopulated is a racist and punching down. It's like, no, it's the other way around. But it's really difficult for somebody to change their mind. So I don't hold out hope for George Monbiot. But so many things he's good about. That's just the breaks.
Well, I guess I have a question for you about the environmental movement in general, and the concept of accelerationism. Like, if you're pro-extinction, would you not kind of be at odds with, these movements, because their goal is to stop climate change from making us go extinct? Would
Right.
you be like for climate change? Like bring
No,
on more climate change so we can just
no,
die
it
out.
really matters how we go extinct.
Oh, I guess that's true. Voluntary versus involuntary.
Versus involuntary. It's far more likely we're going to involuntarily go extinct as the biosphere collapses, and the sixth mass extinction will take us with it, probably earlier on than we would like to think. So, yeah, that's another reason not to procreate. Is it will be one less victim to the sixth mass extinction, which is it's on the way, and I don't know if it's stoppable. We're certainly not making any effort to stop it with new pesticides coming out all the time. Insects go. That's the little things run the world, as E.O. Wilson said.
And for both of you, let's see, trying to understand this question. Okay, this one. Have you taken your strategies from other movements, or do you think the antinatalist movement is unique in some way?
I'm happy to come in first, Les, if you'd like to. I think that it is important to learn from other movements. Of course, we are unique, but every social movement is unique. But I do think that there are helpful lessons from other movements that we can learn from. I guess for me, antinatalism is a hard sell. I mean, it's got anti in the name, and it's not a knock on David Benatar or whoever it was who first kind of coined the phrase or put it out publicly in common usage, because I think it's only in Benatar's usage of it. It's about describing the term accurately rather than thinking what it looks like from a PR or a branding perspective. But I do think that antinatalism, because it is a hard sell and anti anything, it just sounds very negative. I think it will be quite difficult for the antinatalist movement with that branding. But that said, there are parallels that we can take. I think that the two movements we've talked about a lot on this debate, the animal advocacy movement and the environmentalist movement, not only because there's a lot of overlap in personnel, like antinatalists are often animal advocates, environmentalists, or both, but also where we can learn from their mistakes and failures, the mistakes and successes. I gave the example of vegans being narrowly focused on convincing people to be vegan as an example of what I think we can learn from, and not narrowing our focus. I think there's quite a lot of parallels there in terms of convincing everyone to go vegan versus convincing everyone to stop breeding. I think that there are some parallels with the environmental movement as well. Thinking about while we shouldn't worry about looking foolish and that people say mean things about us, but I don't know how it is in the US. A lot of people in the UK hate movements like Just Stop Oil and view Extinction Rebellion as a nuisance. And there was a case where an Extinction Rebellion protester kicked someone in the face from on top of one of the London Underground metro trains, and it just was terrible PR as well as being immoral. So I think that there are definitely things that we can learn from both. And I think for me, I draw heavily on the PR of the environmental movement and wanting to, being concerned about what others think about us from a practical perspective, and also the being the hubris of thinking that we can convince everyone, which I know you don't have that hubris, Les, but it's easy to fall in. I've seen that a lot in other movements I talked about, with vegans and Marxists and this sort of thing, of thinking that we will succeed because we will just convince everyone of the truth of our message, being wary of those.
Okay, well, those are pretty much all the questions, and it looks like we're at time.
We'll have time to address that myself. I think we can learn from all the other movements. Whenever they focus on the bad stuff, they start losing it, like the Extinction Rebellion being a nuisance. But also environmentalists, almost every environmental article starts off with several paragraphs of all the bad stuff. It's as if we have to tell people how bad things are before they will go along with our message. I think we need to start off with the positive right off. And in fact, why even bother to go to the negative? People know what's going on that's negative. They don't want to be reminded of it. I don't want to be reminded of it. I skip those paragraphs of storms, like, so that is my addition to that.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and give closing statements? I think that's next on the agenda here. Yeah, Les, do you have a closing statement for us?
Yes, I would say always look for the common ground, and that's what we have done today. We have found the uncommon ground where we've deviated, but the common ground is more important because that's where we start from, and we both agree on reproductive freedom in general.
Yeah, John, do you have a closing statement?
Sure. I was going to say, really, thank you both of you for this debate discussion. I think, Les, was it Tucker Carlson you were on back in the day? Was that your biggest platform as like a right-wing show? Have you been on some others? I think I've seen your interview with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, about 20 years ago. That has received the most views.
Yes.
Over the years. It's just kind of a perennial.
I'm going to go watch that. I haven't seen it.
I've really admired the way that you have promoted this message, especially when you're like on the right-wing panels or, people who aren't going to be particularly perceptive to this message. Just coming across as a nice, friendly person, it goes a long way. Like if you just personally be likable.
Yeah, it really bothered him that I was compared to Mr. Rogers in the New York Times article. It's like, he wants us to go extinct, and you call him Mr. Rogers? He's my hero. I love it. I think that's great. But I'm a substitute teacher for decades. He's trying to push my buttons. Hey, you can't professional supply teacher. We've seen it all.
Yes, I think you do need to have that like calm composure, the demeanor. You said people pushing your buttons to be a supply teacher, and there is just something about, as you said, like finding the common ground and the way that you've gone about spreading your message. I really, really do admire. As we talked about, we obviously have some disagreements, not just obviously with the debate proposition and whether this should be the goal, but about how we view wild animal suffering and this sort of thing. But right. As we said, we arrived at some points of agreement like reproductive freedom, animal agriculture, and I think I really like, really, really grateful to you, Les, for this conversation and like the charitable way that we've had it, and thank you, Catherine, as well for moderating. Really big fan of your YouTube channel as well.
Oh, thank you.
I guess my take-home message would be like, and we've both had this approach too, is that it's to really focus on what's practical. I'll go back to say like the different areas where there are existing movements that are campaigning on issues that align with the antinatalist conclusion that are not voluntary human extinction. So, for example, the one we keep saying, reproductive freedom, moving away from animal agriculture, opposing creating digital sentience, like sentient AI that can suffer. It's just a horror, dystopian nightmare. Now, me and Les would personally disagree about this, but I would be very opposed to rewilding, as I said, because I think that would be a case of humans bringing other beings into existence. And there's a growing movement around concern for wild animals as individuals and their individual experiences. So we can collaborate here. If you go on the Antinatalist Advocacy website, we have the 4 cause areas, organizations that you can donate to or even work for or volunteer for, or, be involved with those movements around those different cause areas. And I just do worry that human extinction, voluntary or otherwise, as an end goal does harm our ability to collaborate. As mentioned, I do also worry that voluntary human extinction as an end goal, it's one thing to have like a North Star, but something that's so unrealistic, I do think it does harm internally our own thinking about potentially convincing ourselves or our own hubris, which you definitely don't have, Les. But I've seen that trap where we think that we can be more persuasive or more impactful than we can be. And externally as well, people thinking that we might be, wildly arrogant or unrealistic in our ability to kind of push this forward. But that said, love the debate, love the discussion. Thank you to, again, both of you and everyone who's watched and who sent questions in as well. I've really enjoyed it too. And if you want to find out more, I'd say look at the Antinatalist Advocacy website and different things to focus on there.
Yeah.
That's everything
And
from me.
I guess I just wanted to add one thing that just came to mind, like in terms of practical things we can do, which is the child-free movement. Like, they're not exactly antinatalist, but I think promoting that type of content, like sharing your child-free lifestyle and like talking about it, it's attractive to people who might be like on the fence about having kids.
Yes.
And I think that's another avenue.
I would definitely agree. And just on that, sorry, Catherine, just to say, like, we've obviously got Dr. Jay Zygmunt from Child Free World speaking tomorrow. Like
cool.
that kind of like practical advice is really beneficial, because it's one thing to like get something in the abstract to say, okay, I think I shouldn't have children. Well, okay, I think I should go vegan. And there's like, okay, but what do I do practically about it? Like, I don't know. I've got a ton of questions. And so like promoting a child-free lifestyle is like very practically what it is, making it acceptable. Say, yeah, look, we're normal people. You can be child-free and be just a nice, ordinary, normal person. And here's how practically I go about it. I think there's a real benefit to that as well. So just to agree with you there, Catherine.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. And I guess one last reminder that we do have a fundraiser for MSI, the reproductive choices. And yeah, I believe Lawrence will now be giving a few closing remarks. So thanks again.
You.
Thanks, everyone.